Thank you, Dr. Thompson and the Women's Studies Program for your work in acknowledging the contributions of women across our university for the past 17 years. I also want to thank my colleagues in the Dean's Office, my students, and my research college who so thoughtfully and generously took time to nominate me for this award. It is an honor to be part of this 17, now 18-year history of notable women at ETSU. I want to start with a full disclosure. Dr. Thompson took me to lunch back in September, and at that time, she recommended that I look at the Women's Studies website to look at what previous recipients of the Notable Women Award had done in terms of their presentation. Currently, I am working in the just-in-time mode, where whatever has the most immediate deadline is the one that moves to the top of the list. So on Sunday, I went to the website, and holy moly, I started with my colleague, Jody Palaha Jones, who was the 2018 recipient of the Notable Women Award. And I knew immediately I was going to have long days and late nights to meet the standard that Jody and the other women had set before me. And I did something that I haven't done in a very long time. I pulled an all-nighter last night. I want to give the deserved honor that to this award and to the women who preceded me. If I fall short on this, it's not a reflection of my appreciation or gratitude, but it's because I haven't been able to stretch days into 36 hours or weeks into 10 days. So now I will share my story, which I call an uncommon path. And since a picture tells 1,000 words, I will tell my story through photos. My story begins in a small coal camp in southern West Virginia, Tams, West Virginia. The coal camp was carved out of the mountains in the Appalachian coal fields. Now, Tams no longer exists. It closed in 1984, several years after the mines worked out. The community was between the mountains where the coal was mined. It was a major coal camp that during its booming years in the early 1940s and 50s was the first coal town in the United States to have a movie theater. It also had a bowling alley. And these were in addition to the standard company store that all coal camps had. And like other coal camps, it was segregated with separate churches and separate schools. The African American miners and their families lived above where the tipple was. The white miners and their families lived below the tipple in the center of Tams. And the immigrant miners and their families lived still further down. In total, there were about 400 residents. Now, as odd, we had sidewalks, but dirt roads. The streets were narrow and lined with company-owned houses. Every house was painted white with green trim, but faded under the coal dust. Every home had a coal house in the yard. And I went to a 2-room school. And in one room, Mrs. Miner taught grades 1 through 3, and Mr. Billups, the principal, taught grades 4 through 6. So, as the youngest of 4 children growing up very poor, I was not on the path to becoming a notable woman. So I am an unlikely notable woman. My mother was a high school graduate, and my father was a 10th grade dropout. My position as the youngest of 4 children, though, gave me an advantage point. Not only because my parents were too tired to keep up with me and they had relaxed the rules, but also because I essentially was an only child from the time I was in elementary school when my sisters and brothers had moved out when they were 18 and got married shortly after. So with only one child at home, there was more money and there were more opportunities. But most importantly, this position gave me the greatest advantage of being an observer or a detective. I loved to play detective, and I would take my paper and pencil and sneak around and spy on people and write down what they were saying. And this early training proved fruitful later, both personally and professionally. I watched my siblings, especially my sisters, and saw the choices that they made limited their opportunities and left them dependent on their husbands for financial security and support. Like many of our students at ETSU, I am a first-generation college student. Determined to be self-sufficient, I told my parents I wanted to go to college. They were reluctant at first, but gave in, especially when I received scholarships and funding. By the time I was in high school, my father had become disabled with black lung and was forced to retire in his 40s. Because of his disability, I was eligible to receive SSI benefits as long as I was a full-time student. My parents were wonderful role models of hard work, a value that has been woven into all aspects of my work and family life. They also modeled how to play and have fun, and that's something I'm still working to do better. Now, I had only lived in Tams, which is down there, and then when my dad became disabled, we moved to Jumping Branch, West Virginia, which is right there. They were neighboring counties, and they were only 29 miles apart, but it would take over an hour to get there because you had to go over two mountains, Tams Mountain and White Oak Mountain, to get there. In-state colleges were my only options for choosing a college, and I chose West Virginia University for the speech-language pathology program. So moving to Morgantown was like moving to a different country, even though it's in the same state. Back then, it was about 250 miles because the New River Gorge Bridge, which many of you have probably seen, wasn't built yet. And so you'd have to drive down one little windy, narrow road down the mountain, cross the New River, and then wind up the other side, the other mountain. And I-79, you didn't pick that up until you were only about 90 miles away from Morgantown. So it took a lot longer then. So I packed up my VW Bug, which actually I didn't have a car my first couple years, but this is one of the times I was packing up. And I started on an amazing journey that would take me to places and open opportunities that I didn't even know existed or were possible. In order to complete my bachelor's degree, by the time I was 21, I had to finish my degree in 3 years. So 1 week after I finished my bachelor's degree in August, I started my master's degree in speech-language pathology at WVU on full scholarship. My dad, who I said hadn't finished high school, didn't understand why I was still in college and didn't get a job. And this was a recurring puzzle for him. One of the worlds that graduate school opened up for me was an externship at the John F. Kennedy Institute for Handicapped Children at Johns Hopkins University. And there I am, like Yentl, I'm here. And this is now called the Kennedy Krieger Institute. Here I met new faculty and students from other universities, and I worked with families from around the world, many who came to the Institute as their last hope. I worked as part of a transdisciplinary team with some of the most brilliant practitioners working with the most complex patients. The other students and our patients became part of my extended family. This experience opened doors and shaped my thinking and future in ways that I couldn't foresee. One immediate impact was deciding I wanted to work as a speech-language pathologist in a hospital setting at a time when there were very few opportunities for that, and virtually none for a new speech-language pathologist who had just graduated and was starting her clinical fellowship year. I looked everywhere, and not even Moose Jaw, Canada would hire me as a new master's student. Reflecting back, this was a major juncture in my path that altered the course for the rest of my year. It was realizing that I could alter my destiny and not accept the way things were. So I went back to my roots and returned home to the hospital where I was born, Beckley Appalachian Regional Hospital, which was part of the chain of miners' hospitals in the coal fields of southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky. This is a portrait of John L. Lewis, and it still hangs in the lobby of the hospital because he was an influential president of the United Mine Workers of America who worked to improve miners' lives, including their medical care. So I made an appointment to meet the hospital administrator, Carl Weinmeister, and told him about the types of services that I could provide to both inpatients and outpatients. He was either intrigued or wanted to get rid of me, so he sent me to the director of medical records to determine how many patients had been admitted in the previous 12 months who I could have provided services to. I developed a proposal that he took to the Appalachian Regional Hospital Board of Trustees at their home office in Lexington, Kentucky. They approved it, surprisingly, but the position wouldn't begin until September, and this was May. Again, my dad didn't understand why I was turning down job offers to work in schools and holding out for something that he didn't think was a sure thing. So I took a job as a hat check girl in the Ramada Inn for those 4 months. Now, to start a new clinic, I had to go through a certificate of need process in the state. And Don, that was early training that has paid off in all of these letters of notifications that we've worked on in developing new academic programs. As a young 23-year-old woman, I set up the first speech and language clinic in this 10-hospital system and was a department head of one. And so I got to attend the department head meetings in the hospital. This provided early leadership training, even though I was the sole member of my department. And again, I was an observer and a detective. I was watching the other department heads, the chief of nursing, the chief of staff, and hospital administration interact. As you can see, the clinic got a lot of media attention. In fact, this photo got picked up by Associated Press, and my sister, who lived outside of D.C., was shocked to open her newspaper one morning and see a photo of me in there. I learned to network with the community and other professionals in terms of raising awareness about communication disorders and increasing referrals. As I mentioned, Beckley Appalachian Regional Hospital was the first hospital in the ARH system to have a speech-language clinic. But shortly after, I was invited by the CEO of the ARH system to present to the Board of Trustees in Lexington about my clinic. And following that, I was asked by other hospital administrators to help start other speech-language clinics in Harlan, Whitesburg, Middlesboro, and Hazard, Kentucky. Shortly afterwards, all 10 hospitals in the system had speech-language clinics, and several also added audiology. I had a large practice of outpatients, largely pediatrics, but I also worked with adults. There was a high incidence of laryngeal cancer among the coal miners who also frequently smoked. And there's a wonderful story about this man. I saw him for pre-op counseling, and then the surgeons invited me to be in the surgery when he had his larynx removed. And just before he went under, he looked at me and said, "You will be the last person to hear my voice." And I assured him, "I'll be the first person to hear your new voice." I saw patients and continued participating in collaborative practice that I had learned at the Kennedy Institute. Here I am working with a respiratory therapist, helping the patient on a vent use a basic communication board. And on the bottom, I also co-treated with the physical therapist. It was at the hospital where I met the love of my life, Jim Bitter. As a woman in my mid-20s, I believed in my potential and privileges either inherited or gained to push boundaries as a young professional. But it was through Jim that I learned to be an advocate for women. After our first year of marriage, Jim encouraged and supported me to pursue my PhD. I was admitted and began the doctoral program at Northwestern University, but soon realized that wasn't a good fit. I think it came when I was in the class learning to solder and how to build my own research lab. So I was invited to visit the faculty and program at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And it was really an amazing place. All of the women faculty took me to lunch. And in the mid-'80s, that was unusual that there were so many women faculty. Mary Albert, Rita Naramore, Judith Johnston, Jean Anderson, and Karen Forrest. So their selling point, in addition to the strength and reputation of their program, was where else could I go for a PhD and study and work with women, so many women faculty. I was given a full scholarship, so I quit my job at Beckley Appalachian Regional Hospital and moved to Indiana, and Jim and I began a 3-year commuter marriage. Again, my dad did not understand. In my doctoral program, I turned my detective skills into a lifelong profession and became a linguistic detective, discovering new, exotic languages in children who were highly unintelligible, but who had a rule-governed language that was logical and predictable and adhered to the linguistic universals that govern all human languages. I had now launched the beginning of the rest of my career. My PhD advisor is Mary Albert, and she's the one sitting next to me. She modeled the importance of being a clinical scientist and a scientific clinician, and that has been the bedrock of my career. Mary said researchers are like blue-collar workers who go to work every day, putting in a full day designing, conducting, analyzing, presenting, and publishing research. Like the motto I had from my parents, hard work resonated with me. My first academic position was in Southern California at Cal State Fullerton. Since the first year of our marriage, Jim and I were going to make a home together after 3 years of commuting. I was part of the faculty for 6 years. I received tenure and promotion, and then left the following year to take a position at Oklahoma State University. And once again, Jim and I started commuting again for 2 more years because there was no faculty positions for him. This time, we were a flight away from each other rather than a day's drive. Although it was a wonderful job and I received tenure again, Jim and I were offered excellent positions at East Tennessee State University, which not only reunited our family, but it moved me closer to my parents who were in West Virginia. That was August of 1995, and this is our 24th year at East Tennessee State University. I was focused on establishing my teaching and research career, so we delayed starting a family for 10 years. We became a family of 3 with the birth of our daughter, Allison, and then it took me another 6 years to convince Jim that we needed a second child, and our daughter, Nora, was born. My scholarship grew with funding from 3 NIH grants. And these grants were the foundation of my intervention research that funded the development of a treatment model for children with severe speech-sound disorders. And then later was the translational research that funded the development of a mobile app for this approach and other newer linguistic models of intervention for severe speech-sound disorders. This bridges the research to practice gap in making the newer evidence-based models of intervention easier to implement by practitioners. This research also led to 2 books, including this one. And I want to just point out that I took that photograph. Those are our daughters, Allison on the left and Nora on the right. It was our Christmas card that year. And I'm currently developing a test to evaluate the speech skills of very young children, 18 to 36 months old. Hard work is still a guiding philosophy in my life. My research led me to international collaborations across the world, including over a decade-long relationship with my colleague, Dr. Sharon McLeod from Australia, who was recently recognized as the top researcher in the world in speech-language pathology and audiology. I spent my sabbatical with Sharon in 2007. In 2008, I moved from my college home to the Center of Excellence in Early Childhood Learning and Development as the Associate Director. I expanded my research to build collaborative research teams in education, medicine, public health, and my home college, clinical and rehabilitative health sciences. After 6 years in the center, I began my current position as the Associate Dean in Academic Affairs in the College of Clinical and Rehabilitative Health Sciences. And once again, I had the experience of coming home to my roots. Additional international opportunities were open to me. A pivotal point in my career was being invited to be an Erskine Fellow at the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, for a semester in 2011. And I've had many opportunities to do shorter teaching opportunities in other places, and this is one recently where I was teaching in Denmark. In 2015, I was named an honorary professor at the University of Sydney, where I have collaborated with faculty and served on PhD research committees. While the first two-thirds of my career focused largely on research and teaching, I was a late bloomer to leadership positions, but opportunities to serve in national leadership roles became available. In 2014, I was selected to co-chair the annual National Convention of the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, which is a large conference of over 18,000 practitioners, scientists, and academics in speech, language, swallowing, and hearing science. In 2015, I was elected to serve a 3-year term as Vice President of Academic Affairs and Speech-Language Pathology for the American Speech-Language Hearing Association. And this year, I was elected the 2020 President-elect of ASHA. ASHA is one of the largest professional associations with over 200,000 members. The national office is an impressive space in Rockville, Maryland that houses over 300 staff. My path has been an unlikely one, as I said, but it was shaped at critical junctures by a blue-collar work ethic in all aspects of my personal and professional life, a propensity toward being a detective and observer, a belief that leadership is about everyday leaders rather than status, and most importantly, by the people who have shared my life. Anne Lamott, one of my favorite authors, suggests that the book of our life is written largely through our friendships. These voluntary friendships are my heart friends, where I can count on truth and tenderness and fun, a lot of fun. And I am so happy that several of my heart friends are here with me tonight. My students, several of whom I'm so happy you're here, ground me and reaffirm that I've got the best job in the world. And I've been doing this a long time. My husband, Jim Bitter, and our daughters, Allison and Nora, have always been my safety net and sounding board and give unconditional love and support. I am where I am today because of my family. And I can draw a direct line from any achievements and accomplishments or contributions I've made back to Jim, Allison, and Nora. They have supported and encouraged me in every effort, no matter how big or how small. My colleagues are my work family who have given me space and support to think big, stretch outside my comfort zone, and reach higher. We have some new members of our work family who are not in this photo, but who are here tonight. I love the quote by Isaac Newton that, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." I'm grateful for my colleagues, and I'm proud of the accomplishments we've achieved together. We're not a team because we work together. We're a team because we respect and care for each other. Thanks for making coming to work on Monday mornings something I look forward to. And finally, having won the parent lottery in life, I am who I am because of them. Thank you for listening to my story about my unlikely path to where I am tonight. As my mother often said, and would say tonight if she were here, who would have thought the little girl from Tams will be receiving the ETSU Notable Woman Award. Thank you very much.